All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this afternoon. So thanks for joining us as we continue on our path of preparing folks for summer learning and thinking about the fall. Today is our fifth webinar, talking more about unfinished learning and resources for literacy. I did want to just mention to folks that the webinar from Tuesday is posted on our Launch Nebraska site, including the slides and additional tools and templates are there as well. I might just also mention too, if you have math colleagues that weren't able to join us last week for the Unfinished Learning in Mathematics webinar, you might want to share that with them as well. And then, as always, please continue to continue the conversation via the Twitter space. You can use the hashtag LaunchNebraska or tweet at my Twitter account, NDE_TLA, or at SchoolKit Group. So I'm excited for everyone to be here. Just a quick reminder about what we're doing over the course of 10 webinars between the end of May and the middle of June is really to talk more specifically about summer learning and provide some tools and resources that would allow you to think about how you might do some planning for summer that's aligned with your continuity of learning plans. And then from there, we'll start to shift over the next couple of weeks to thinking more specifically about making plans for the fall and for fall preparation. And excited to have our partner SchoolKit join us again. And Julia's back today, so she's going to help us on our journey this afternoon as we explore more about unfinished learning for literacy, but then also getting into some specific resources folks may want to leverage this summer. So Julia, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Thank you, Corey. I am very happy to be back here with you all today. And for those of you who may be new and didn't meet me on Tuesday, my name is Julia Cooper. I am the Director of Literacy at SchoolKit. I am a former teacher and curriculum developer, and I am based outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Those of you who joined us Tuesday have already seen this picture of my 3-year-old son, Jack, who is pictured here doing a little remote read aloud to his Nana over Zoom. So like I said on Tuesday, it's really an honor to be able to present and be here with you all today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. And most of all, thank you for all of the work you all are doing for Nebraska students. So I do want to go over briefly a few norms just to help you make the most of today's webinar. So first, if you have any questions during this time, please use the Q&A feature. Use this for questions about tech or logistics. And if you also have content questions, this would be a good place to drop those as they arise. This can be found at the bottom of your Zoom window. We also encourage you to go to view options to exit the full screen on Zoom. We will be chatting a couple of links and resources during this session, and it will be a little bit easier to see and access those if you're not in full screen. Occasionally during the webinar, I will ask you to respond and reflect on some things in the chat. Please share your reflections during this time. We are really excited to hear from you. This is also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And finally, as Corey mentioned, just a reminder that this session and the previous sessions are all posted and available for you. We encourage you to revisit this and share it widely if you know people who may find it helpful. So we're going to begin just by really briefly regrounding ourselves in this graph that kind of frames the challenge that we're all facing. On Tuesday, we looked at this graph from a recent NWEA study, and we saw that recent COVID slide estimates are predicting that students may return to school next year with learning loss of at least 30% compared to a typical school year. On Tuesday, we explored some do's and don'ts related to addressing unfinished learning that students may return with in ELA in the fall. And we also named 3 guiding principles for doing this really challenging and really important work, which I will recap now. So these are meant to support and guide your thinking as you plan for teacher and student return to the fall. Our first principle is to put people first. Today, we're going to consider a variety of things that stakeholders that are invested in student success can be doing now over the summer to begin planning for a successful start to the school year. Some of these stakeholders include, but are certainly not limited to, ESU leaders, school leaders, teachers, and parents and families. We encourage you all to put these people first when rolling out any new system that we talk about today, and acknowledge the importance of empathy and compassion for what everyone is going through during this really difficult time. Our second guiding principle here is taking an integration approach to supporting unfinished learning instead of a remediation approach. As we discussed on Tuesday, this means moving forward with grade level content and providing just-in-time supports, such as vocabulary or knowledge building, to help all students access those grade level texts. And finally, our third principle is to keep it simple and focused. This is way easier said than done, especially during times like these, but we want to keep this in mind as we go through our learning and think about how we can simplify things and make our guidance as concrete as we possibly can. So this brings us to our focus for today's session. I'll pause for just a moment so that you can read over this session focus on your own. So during the Unfinished Learning in ELA webinar on Tuesday, we explored what a strong and research-based approach to addressing unfinished learning looks like for literacy. As you can see, this webinar really builds on that learning by exploring how leaders can pave the way this summer for a successful start to the next year. So we're going to walk through some important systems, structures, considerations that you should plan for and establish now. And as Corey mentioned, we'll also highlight an array of freely available resources to support student literacy learning over the summer. So before we really dive into this new learning, I do think it's important to briefly recap the approach we discussed on Tuesday to supporting unfinished learning. I think this is important because starting with a shared understanding of the core aspects of this recommended approach will help us to engage more deeply in this session's content, and it will also help you to understand more deeply the rationale behind these planning moves that we are going to recommend today. So you'll remember that in math, we really rely heavily on the coherence of the standards to determine what content and skills are most essential to teach in an integrated way alongside grade level content. But in ELA, the approach is different because instead of asking ourselves about the standards that students missed, our focus is really on the text. We want to be thinking for each unit in each text, what knowledge and supports do my students need most to access this grade level text? So again, this does not mean that the standards are not important. They are critically important. However, because the standards in ELA are taught in service of making meaning of the text, our approach is just a little bit different than it is in math. And so here are the specific recommendations that we discussed on Tuesday. First, when addressing unfinished learning in ELA, we recommend that the focus for teacher planning is on identifying and addressing potential gaps in knowledge instead of isolating skills and standards for reteaching. We encourage you to stay the course with high quality instructional materials that you have adopted, and to make sure that no matter your materials, you're providing that grade level content and instruction to all students. And we also discussed how the approach to foundational skills is different. Because these skills are taught and learned in a systematic progression, we have to make sure we are providing that targeted and systematic instruction to all students who need it. So these are the basics. Following these recommendations will promote equitable instruction, and they are aligned to the Nebraska instructional shifts that we spoke about. So I do want to acknowledge before we get too far along here that there is some uncertainty around what school may look like next year. Will we be in person with some changes? Will we be remote? Will it be a combination of both? This question can be stressful and daunting for a lot of reasons, including questions about resources that students will have access to and uncertainty about how to deliver instruction remotely. So I just want to assure you that there's a lot to think about here, we know. The guidance that we're providing today is designed to address important planning considerations that are going to be relevant no matter how school looks in the fall. And so although the remote learning and planning for that is not our explicit focus, we do encourage you to keep asking those good questions that are arising around it, and to consider how today's guidance might apply in that setting if it is the case. So we will also share some newly released resources towards the end that can support you in thinking through this specific challenge. So let's dig into our essential question. What can we do now to begin planning for students' return to school? I know this is on your minds. Let's go ahead and dig in. Here's how we'll spend the rest of our time together. And we're going to jump in now, as I said, to explore these critical leader planning moves that will pave the way both for a successful summer and also a successful start to next year. So it can be challenging when thinking about systems and structures in school. It can be really difficult, challenging work to put these things in place in any time. So we want to start by imagining some common non-example scenarios to emphasize the importance of investing in strong systems and structures during the summer. The goal of this is to bring awareness not only around what is effective related to systems at this time, but we also want to be clear about what's not effective, things that you want to avoid in this planning. So once again, these practices may not be foreign to us, they're very common, but we just want to make sure that we're as intentional as possible when planning in this current climate. So let's explore some of these non-examples. Let's imagine that the 5th grade team has time blocked off in late summer and once a week during the school year starts to meet. During their meetings, they discuss student support team agenda items and contact parents of students with behavior or attendance issues. Let's imagine that when designing the master schedule, leaders determine that all students who underperformed on the 18-19 end of year assessment are pulled from core ELA instruction to engage in an online literacy intervention twice a week. Let's imagine that when preparing to teach, teachers plan alone and receive no feedback or support on their unit plan or lesson plans. Let's imagine that over the summer, the leadership team invests in an online literacy intervention program and creates logins for all special education students and ELL students. And finally, let's imagine that during a K-3 leadership planning meeting, the team uses January 2020 assessment data to plan necessary foundational skills supports for the coming year, since end of year data was not available. So as you probably recognized, while many of these things are well-intentioned, each of those scenarios show evidence of an unsupportive or a misaligned system. First, this shows evidence of inequitable master schedules. In an example on the previous slide, the leadership team relied on old assessment data in order to determine which students needed an intervention. Next, they placed those students in a literacy intervention online that pulled them from their core ELA instruction. This created gaps in learning each week. In another example, the leadership team made assumptions about student needs based on a label and enrolled those students in that literacy intervention program as well. Another misaligned system is providing limited or unsupported teacher PD. This creates a really common pitfall because of the challenging nature of scheduling and collaboration. We know that scheduling is hard, again, in any time, but it may become even more challenging now. However, this lack of connection between teachers might lead to not identifying knowledge gaps that were missed in the spring. Additionally, delayed or unclear communication is something that can cause a lot of issues and tension that we really want to plan for and get ahead of. These are likely things that you as leaders have started thinking about and planning for. We know that lack of clear communication can lead to some issues with mindset, buy-in, and follow-through. So thinking about systems that support transparent communication now should be on the forefront of our minds as leaders. Finally, another unsupportive system would be not collecting assessment data in K-3. NDE recognizes that the potential for having to collect assessment data in this current climate, there's just a lot of questions swirling and it can feel daunting. And this is a challenge that Abby and Marissa and the team are working on providing more guidance around. But the important thing to remember here is that we just want to avoid relying on too outdated assessment data to determine what students are needing in the fall. So now that we've seen those non-examples, you are likely wondering, what should we do instead? So we have a scenario that we're going to ask you to dig into in just a moment that will help illuminate this key takeaway here. It's really important for us now to be creating systems and structures that leverage time and talent intentionally. So what does this look like? Let's get into it. Okay, so we have a vision of success scenario for you. I want to name that this scenario represents just one possible vision of success. This is certainly not the only way that this can look, and we know that you're going to need to make decisions based on your school context and the needs of your students. So our hope is that this scenario will provide some useful examples for you to start this thinking. Kaylee just dropped a tiny URL into the chat box. Please go ahead and navigate to that scenario, and as you're reading, reflect upon this question here. How did this leadership team create systems that support students with unfinished learning in ELA? I will stop talking for 3 or 4 minutes so that you can read, and towards the end of your reading, we will open up the chat and ask for you to share some of your reflections on this question. As you finish reading this scenario, we want to hear from you in the chat. Please go ahead and, as you wrap up, respond to this question in the chat. How did this leadership team create systems that support students with unfinished learning? Dallas shared that the leadership team established consistent collaboration times. Melissa said they guaranteed common planning time and guaranteed that all students had core instruction in ELA. Jane said the creation of a master schedule to support intervention time. Students were always at the center of the planning and the thinking. They planned for possible remote learning. They met as ELA grade level vertical teams to help each other understand key learnings. Common planning time with a clear focus. Yes, that focus on materials. Kids were not pulled from core instructional time. They added background building opportunities, making that connection to Tuesday's content. They used current data upon returning to school. They had weekly planning time. Planning is coming up a whole lot, the value of planning time and teacher collaboration. Planning time with students' needs in mind. Absolutely. So thank you so much for sharing these reflections. They keep coming in. It's clear that we all know how important this type of system and structure is. And some trends that are really coming out of the chat right now are falling into these 3 buckets that we've identified. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and dig into these 3 buckets of systems and structures that made the work in this scenario come to life. So here are the 3 buckets we're going to talk through. We're going to begin by thinking about the master schedule and how you can begin planning to protect that student and teacher time that so many of you mentioned in the chat. So a master schedule that supports unfinished learning in ELA does a couple of things. First of all, it's intentionally created to protect both students and teachers' time. So as you all named, we must prioritize providing ample, uncompromised time for students to engage in that core ELA instruction. So many of you put in the chat that you noticed that the intervention time, there was time for it, but it was outside of core ELA. Additionally, this team prioritized regular content-specific planning time for all general education teachers and specialists. So the team came together to figure out how they could get their teachers this collaboration and collaborative planning time that can make such a difference. As you saw in the scenario, this time for collaboration ensured that those 8th grade students would have the time and the text that they would need to build essential background knowledge in service of that grade level anchor text. So now let's break down what's going on here with teacher planning and development. And so effective planning that supports unfinished learning in ELA is, I know I sound like a broken record here, it's frequent and protected. It's also really focused on the internalization of high quality ELA instructional materials. So while providing time for teachers is incredibly important, carving out the expectations for how they spend that time is just as vital. So you can support teachers in doing this by providing agendas or objectives for planning meetings to ensure that other important polls and topics, such as school culture events, discussing behavior, doesn't take over time carved out for planning content. Those conversations are important, but we need to help teachers ensure that they have, in addition to that time, protected planning time focused on the teaching of grade level literacy content. Additionally, this time should be collaborative when possible. It is so helpful to have time to come together as an ELA team so that teams can plan together to deeply internalize their content that will support students in being able to access that grade level content. Because there was a structure in that scenario for teachers to plan vertically, the 8th grade team was able to identify a gap and find a high quality text to support students with that gap, which is a really challenging task, and it's much better done collaboratively. Finally, we know that time is such a scarce resource, but we just can't emphasize enough how important it will be for teachers to have ample planning time to dig into their materials and to plan the appropriate supports that will be necessary. So you're probably wondering right about now, what should this summer planning look like? So let's get a little bit more specific here. We have created an unfinished learning planning tool that you can share with your teachers to support and guide them through this work as they plan for their first unit. So this tool is organized into 4 different steps. The tool is directly linked to the planning process we recommend while unit planning in this current climate. So you will be able to find this tool in the resources that we'll link, and we'll also have a moment to explore it in just a minute. So first, I'm going to talk you through these 4 planning steps that we recommend. We're kind of breaking down here what you saw in that scenario. The first step that teachers should focus on is prioritizing unit study of their grade level instructional materials with a deep focus on reading and analyzing the text. When teachers are already using a shifts-aligned, knowledge-based curriculum rooted in grade level texts, this step is really critically important. Teachers must deeply know their texts and the expectations of students, including knowledge and skills, in order to teach a unit effectively. And they must know the content and text inside and out in order to select and plan those appropriate supports and scaffolds that we talked about on Tuesday. This type of unit study is a best practice for any time, but it's just especially important now because of how it will situate teachers to support unfinished learning even more effectively. So steps 2 through 4 that you'll see here are specifically for addressing that missed learning due to school closures in the fall. So we recommend that once teachers understand their unit at the grade level they're going to teach, that they next familiarize themselves with missed learning, including texts and knowledge that should have been built from the spring. Then we recommend that they analyze the potential impact of the missed learning on students' ability to access the grade level content. And finally, they do the work of planning supports that will help students access the grade level content that they're about to teach. This was the heart of Tuesday's webinar, was this 4th step. How can we think about planning supports that will help students have access to this complex text? So it's important that this is done for each unit as the content knowledge is built throughout the year. So in some instructional materials, knowledge builds over the course of the year. And so you want to repeat this process for each unit of instruction. You'll remember from the baseball study on Tuesday that knowledge builds on knowledge, and the more the more knowledge you have on a topic, the easier it is to build deeper, more nuanced knowledge. That's why repeating this process and really attending to missed learning in the spring is going to be so important as ELA teachers plan throughout the year. I want to say that this tool is also going to be helpful if you have not yet adopted knowledge-based instructional materials. It can still provide a really useful framework for your teachers who are thinking through how they want to plan for the beginning of the year and what they want to prioritize teaching. So I want to give you a moment now to explore this planning tool. This won't be a full deep dive into the tool, but I do just want you to get your eyes on it, scan it, kind of see what it's all about. And as you're looking at it, reflect, what type of support might your ELA teachers need in order to engage in this type of planning effectively? I'll pause just for a couple of minutes. Kaylee will chat out the link to this tool. Please navigate to the tool, take a look, and reflect on how you might use this with your ELA teachers. So as you finish just again getting a first look at this resource, I just want to note that this can be used both in person or in remote collaborative planning meetings. This type of intellectual preparation and planning is planning that teachers will need to do no matter what school looks like next year. So during lesson level preparation, that may be where teachers are making some different instructional decisions that are intentional based on the format of delivery. But this intentional planning at the unit level to address knowledge is going to need to happen no matter what. And so as you consider and reflect on how you might share this with your ELA teachers, we know that it can be really helpful to have some concrete and specific examples of completed tools. This can help you conceptualize how you might use it with teachers, and this can also help teachers and support them in the type of thinking and planning that's required to address unfinished learning. So we've created a couple of supplemental resources connected to this tool for you to review later as you dig into this work, and we'll provide these as follow-up to the webinar as well. So this first example that you see pictured here is a sample completed ELA learning tool that is focusing specifically on the grade 8 first unit that you read about, A Raisin in the Sun. In this example, you can see the gaps that the teacher identified after reading all the texts in the unit and reviewing the last unit of 7th grade, which had the anchor text, the eye, the ear, and the arm. As these gaps are both content knowledge gaps and thematic, the teacher planned extra supports to help students access the grade level text, A Raisin in the Sun. You may want to provide this resource to your ELA team as a model after you introduce them to this tool. The second example that we have for you is a virtual common planning time agenda to make this work come to life in this new time of social distancing. So this agenda outlines the pre-work in the scenario, and it gives a format for teachers to start virtually collaborating in order to plan for missed learning in their first grade level unit. This tool will hopefully be helpful for you as you begin to plan out what your summer content planning looks like for your ELA teams or your beginning of year planning. Both of these examples will be found in the folder that we're going to link on Launch Nebraska. So I do just want to note one more time that while it may feel new and uncomfortable, this type of planning can be done collaboratively and effectively via Zoom or other remote conferencing platforms. And our hope is that this agenda will provide a template for you to continue planning ongoing PLC and collaborative planning meetings remotely for as long as is required. So in summary, here are the 4 steps that are on this tool. These are the concrete steps that we suggest to get your teachers started with this planning work over the summer. And the sooner they can start doing this, the better. We know that your contexts are different, but as soon as you can get teachers engaged in this type of planning, the better prepared they will be to address unfinished learning in the next school year. So these tools that we shared are very timely, but I also want to stress that these practices should continue throughout the school year. So throughout the fall and throughout the rest of the school year, you should have teachers repeat this process for unit study that's focused on planning to support knowledge gaps for each unit. And during lesson preparation, you'll also want to keep the focus on the text. Help your teachers analyze, understand the big ideas, and anticipate areas where students may need those additional supports, either because the text is particularly challenging or because of missed learning that we're accounting for from the spring. So a quick note here about pacing considerations for the instructional materials that you're using. We know there's a lot of factors at play, and that building pacing calendars and schedules is a really challenging task. But our recommendation here is that you really need to understand the design of your knowledge-based instructional materials before you make any decisions about pacing. So this guidance applies if you've adopted instructional materials that are designed based on the principle of knowledge building and the literacy instructional shifts. So in CKLA, for example, domains or units are vertically planned across the year and across many grade levels. This is intentionally created so that the knowledge built in one unit will resurface again and be built upon in later units. So this means that if we remove a unit, important intentional knowledge will be lost for students, and they may struggle later more as a result. On the other hand, if your instructional materials are not vertically planned to build knowledge across grade levels and over the course of the year, removing a unit to more flexibly pace your instruction wouldn't have the same impact. It will still have an impact. We don't want to take this decision lightly, but when you're reworking pacing for the school year, we just encourage you to be intentional and to be careful and to consider the impact of what is lost and what is gained by making changes to curriculum pacing guides. No matter the instructional materials that you are using, investing time in planning and administering diagnostic assessments to find out what students know already will give you back instructional time. So if you haven't yet adopted materials, we encourage you to use these type of assessments to gauge where students are. We encourage you to take advantage of free, high quality aligned resources, and also just to keep adoption of materials on the horizon. So I do want to, again, note that foundational skills is different. You'll remember these two guiding considerations for addressing unfinished learning that we discussed on Tuesday. These guidelines for administering diagnostic assessments and addressing gaps accordingly are most relevant in grades K-3, but they may also be relevant if older students have needs as well. So this summer, you can begin planning for these by considering the approved assessments and planning how you may go about supporting students who do come back to school with foundational skills needs. So that brings us to our last bucket, which is effective communication that can support unfinished learning in ELA. So we all know that clear and consistent communication in schools and systems is always a large consideration, but your staff and stakeholders are likely feeling that the weight of it, it's more important than ever during this time. And so here are a couple of things that we suggest as you create a communication plan for your school communities. First, it's really important that as soon as possible, you articulate and share your vision for addressing unfinished learning in ELA. Be sure to allow time for questions, concerns, and consider establishing a system to collect and review these that's separate from our email inboxes. We all want to try to keep those as calm as possible. Additionally, be transparent and explain the rationale behind school-wide schedule and system changes to stakeholders. Buy-in is necessary for a plan to really be effective, and the path towards that is being transparent, consistent, and supportive. So think back to the transparency and consistency of communication in this scenario. The leadership team first shared their vision with the ELA department, and then they sent out a schedule of virtual dates to begin planning. The team established and communicated clear pre-work, goals, and action steps, and they supported the ELA department along the way. Equally as important is having a strong system in place for communication with families. Planning ahead for this can really help ease the transition into the next school year. We have here on this slide a few common platforms for family communication. Many of you are already using and leveraging systems of these really well. If you don't yet have one, you may want to consider adopting one of these this summer so that you can be ready to go next school year. We do want to encourage you that if you do already use one of these or another system that works for you, keep leveraging that existing system. Keep it simple. There's no need to reinvent the wheel or switch systems if you have a communication plan that is working for you and your community. So before we pause for just a little reflection, I just want to highlight one other new resource just released by the team at NDE. This is available on Launch Nebraska. This document provides guidance that can be used to plan summer learning opportunities, and it offers some resources and considerations based on this shift to remote learning and research-based summer learning that we've been talking about. So this can be a really useful tool. We really encourage you to check it out if you have not yet reviewed this resource. Okay, Again, that was a lot. Thank you for sticking with me here. Here are some key actions that we want to highlight from this part of the webinar. Again, this is all review. We've talked about these. These are just boiled down things you want to do when planning systems and structures. Do ensure that all students have uncompromised time in their schedule for core ELA instruction. Do create and protect time for collaboration amongst teachers. If possible, build some flex time into pacing calendars to support teachers in being able to deliver those supports, and make sure that your communication is clear and timely and consistent. And you know, we like to really hammer things home here. Please make sure that as you're planning these things, we avoid pulling students out of core ELA instruction. We don't want to minimize the importance of collaborative planning time for teachers. And we want to make sure that we don't wait until the fall to communicate important aspects of our plan to stakeholders. So we are really looking forward to hearing your reflections here. I'm going to pause and ask you to consider your school or your current context and think about how might you start applying the learning from this part of the webinar in your context. As you reflect on that, please go ahead and chat some responses. I'd love to be able to share with you some things that people on the webinar are saying. Sarah says, communicate this tool to current school admin so they can start thinking about how to use it. Sharing resources. I will need to work with the grade level below mine to ensure that I know what students missed. Yeah, that collaborative teacher planning, plan early and often, protect planning time. Digging into the materials, sharing the unfinished learning tool and the planning agenda with districts. George says this sounds simple, but he just wants to start these conversations and continue them in schools. That's so important. It's easy to get lost in the weeds, but we want to make sure that we keep these conversations going around systems and structures. That's great. Intentionally planning communication with families. And Karen says that equitable practices are such a foundational piece in all of these decisions. So keeping equity in mind is critically important. They keep coming in. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and reflections. And we're now gonna move into an exciting part of the webinar. We're gonna share a bunch of freely available summer learning resources. We know that planning these systems and structures is critically important, but we also know that students with unfinished learning need access to resources now. We can't wait until the fall to begin this work. And so that's what we're going to dig into right now. So we're about to highlight some useful resources that are freely available and can support summer learning in two main ways, as outlined in the continuity of learning guidance that was issued from NDE. So we'll begin with enrichment opportunities. These are opportunities that support the ongoing development of knowledge and skills within a grade level. So these can be a wide range of learning opportunities, but the important thing to know is that these can be provided by a parent, a caregiver, or through independent practice. And so what are some of these literacy learning resources that exist? Before we dive in, I just want to reassure you, and Kaylee will chat this link out now, that there's no need to write these down furiously. We have assembled all of these in a document for you with links and brief descriptions. So please feel free to follow along there if it's helpful, or stay with me here and just know that these are compiled for you. So the first type of enrichment resource are resources for text access. We know that reading at home is one of the best ways that families can support literacy development. But text access can become a barrier. So here are just 3 resources that can support text access that you can share with families. First is Overdrive. This is a website that provides text access through public libraries, local public libraries. You can get access to ebooks, audiobooks. Storyline Online is a pretty cool resource that streams videos of celebrities and different public figures reading aloud children's books. And then ARC is also offering free access to some books now for students and families. Additionally, we want to highlight this resource again. We mentioned this on Tuesday, but this Read at Home plan is full of strategies and resources that parents can use to support the development of critical literacy skills with their children at home. So this can support families in developing those foundational skills that we talked about in young readers that are so critically important, using materials that are commonly found around the home. So we encourage you to share this resource with families if you haven't yet already. This is a similar resource. It's another collection of resources with a similar goal as the Read at Home plan. The Supporting Your Child's Reading at Home is a compilation of videos that can support parents in learning how to do activities that are engaging and build relationships with their children at home while building foundational skills of reading. So currently they have activities available for grades K through 2, and it includes not only the video for parents to learn the activity, but also detailed descriptions and links to other resources. So this might be another useful thing to share with parents of children in the younger grades. And of course, I know you are likely familiar with this page, but there are many additional opportunities for enrichment available on the Family Resources tab of the Nebraska Reads Summer Reading Opportunity website. Please check it out. Encourage families to go there if they're looking for even more opportunities for enrichment. And so we're now going to talk about educational opportunities as well. These educational opportunities are those opportunities that are standards-based instruction that instructors are actually supporting in using evidence-based teaching and learning practices. And so these opportunities, unlike enrichment opportunities, are facilitated by an instructor, but it can be facilitated in either a synchronous, asynchronous, or blended learning environment. And so the first resource that we're going to highlight here are these grab and go resources. Some of you may be familiar with these. These are 8 weeks of ready to go instructional packets that span grades K through 9 for ELA, but they also have packets available for math and science. These are freely available packets available from instruction partners on their school resource hub, and we've also linked it in the resource document that we've shared. Modifications are allowed and encouraged. And these can be a really great option because when you're considering implementation over the summer, they can provide a low-tech option. So these packets are printable, and so they don't necessarily require devices or internets for students if you are printing and distributing these to your families. They also can be completed independently when students have time, but I will say that they are most effective, as are all educational opportunities, if they're paired with regular communication and feedback from a teacher or instructor. We have a few other educational resources to highlight in addition to these ready-to-go packets. During this time in response to COVID, several publishers of high-quality ELA instructional materials have released new free resources that can support teachers planning for instruction this summer. So these resources can, for the most part, be adapted or used in a synchronous or asynchronous setting. We want to highlight just a few of these, and we encourage you to explore them and share them with your teachers as you plan, if you think that they might be helpful and aligned. So first we have Core Knowledge, which is connected to CKLA, Core Knowledge Language Arts instructional materials. This curriculum is freely available, but they have also released additional instructional materials during this time on their hub. Great Minds has also released a series of video lessons called Knowledge on the Go. We're going to dig more into those in just a moment. And finally, EL Education has a hub as well with additional resources and materials that teachers can use and adapt during this time in a remote setting. So we're going to briefly highlight Knowledge on the Go because this can be, I think, a really useful resource for teachers, and many of these video lessons are ready to go and ready to be used. Essentially, Great Minds has created a bank of over 1,000 video lessons based on their high quality instructional materials. So included are videos for math, science, and English language arts. The ELA videos are rooted in wit and wisdom, which many of you may be familiar with. They were crafted based on the final unit in wit and wisdom that was most likely missed due to school closures. So while these video lessons will be especially helpful if you were already implementing wit and wisdom, they can still be helpful to teachers no matter the instructional materials that you use. So if you have teachers delivering instruction via summer school, we do recommend that you check out these units if teachers will be providing instruction. And so here's just a glimpse into what the platform looks like for Knowledge on the Go. It includes a welcome module that will introduce teachers and students to the platform and what they can expect from the resource. And then it's paired with videos, one of which is pictured here, that has a teacher delivering the lesson. And then there are also supplemental activities, tasks, and follow-up rooted in the text of the lesson. Something to consider when you are thinking about implementing Knowledge on the Go is that this is a higher tech option. It will require students to access and watch those video lessons online. It can be completed independently, but again, most effective when paired with an instructor who is providing support, checking in, giving feedback to the student. You'll also want to consider text access before moving forward with this. While the video lessons are freely available, the texts are not always freely available. And so that's something else to consider before you make a decision. We do want to name that while these free resources are really, really useful for educational opportunities over the summer and into the fall, they won't carry teacher planning necessarily throughout the 2021 school year. There's no substitute for high quality materials. And so we just want to point you in the direction of this resource, anymaterialsmatter.org, if that is part of your plan to consider adopting materials in the coming year. Before I turn it back over to Corey, there are just a couple other additional resources we want to highlight here. And I know this is a lot. Remember that these are linked for you. This is learning guidance for students with disabilities. This document is going to provide really helpful guidance related to unfinished learning, specifically for students with disabilities. And then we also know that besides academics, while we've been focused on academics and content, we know that your staff and students' well-being and health is also of top concern right now for all of you. And so we wanted to point you towards two brand new health and wellness resources that were just released this week. Pictured here is the Supporting Child and Family Wellbeing resource. It's a document that provides concrete steps, specific questions you can ask students and their caregivers when you're checking in and supporting them. And it also provides some contact information for resources and support services that families may need during this time. Additionally, new and updated health and wellness information has been posted for the summer on launchnebraska.com. So I do want to pause for just a moment before I send it back over to Corey. We'd love to hear, just based on this overview, what resources that we've shared are you most excited about using, and how are you thinking about using these? Please go ahead, take just 1 minute to chat your response to us. We're excited to hear what you think. And then I will turn it back over to Corey. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Julia. Looks like we've got some good stuff coming in. Folks appreciate the planning tool and the templates. I think that folks are also recognizing the Nebraska Nebraska Instructional Materials Collaborative and the reviews from Ed Reports and how they can leverage those core instructional programs that are high quality. I was also looking at Knowledge on the Go. I think that's a really great resource. And if you have colleagues that are using Eureka Math, you might also want to send them to that resource as well. So I think there's some really great things to consider in that space. I'm excited just about the resources that we have on Nebraska Reads as well, so be sure to check that out. We'll keep that updated as well. There is a short survey. If you can complete that, we can get that in the chat box. So if you want to just go ahead and click on that and complete that as we start to wrap up here on a Thursday afternoon. One thing I just kind of wanted to bring us back to was the first webinar that we had. And if you did not join us on the first webinar, specifically around unfinished learning and instructional equity, we had Lacey Robinson with Unbound Ed provide a keynote, and there's a graphic that she provided on the screen that we pulled from her presentation that's also linked. If anything, over the last 3 weeks, we've heard about the need for integration of Q4 versus starting with where we think kids may have left off. So I think that's really important for our conversation around equity as well. The other thing that I wanted to note was that Pivot Learning, along with Unbound Ed, has created an equitable learning recovery toolkit. And the thing that I really liked about what they've created in that resource is surveys. So if you want to survey parents, or you want to survey teachers, or you want to survey students around their experience this spring, you would be able to do that specifically for literacy and mathematics. So I thought that was, I might just recommend just Google Equitable Learning Recovery Toolkit, and it should come up there. The other thing that as we start to wrap up, I just also want to acknowledge that the idea of unfinished learning isn't something that was created because of COVID. We know that every year many students have unfinished learning in a normal school year. So this notion of unfinished learning is not new. I know those folks who work with students with disabilities sometimes understand that perhaps in a different way than those of us that did not provide that direct instruction. So I think that's something really critically important, that it's not because we shifted out of classrooms. It might be more pronounced for students, and particularly our students that are historically marginalized, but it's something that we should always be thinking about, is really determining what unfinished learning students might have over the course of the year. So as we kind of start to finish out today, just a reminder, we do have 2 more webinars next week, really talking specifically about supporting all students. We know that strong core instruction for all is good for all. So on Tuesday, we're going to focus the conversation on supporting students with disabilities. And then on Thursday, we'll provide some information around supporting our English learners. One thing that I might mention too on the Launch Nebraska website is we are starting to build out additional resources for fall re-entry. Over the next, I would say, 2 to 3 to 4 weeks. A lot of information will be coming out there specifically designed to help you as you're thinking about transitioning towards the fall. More than anything, I just want to say thanks for your time and thanks for your work. And we certainly continue to be amazed and impressed, and most importantly, inspired by our educators here in Nebraska. It's just been such a great thing to see how everyone's come together, and certainly appreciate our partners in this effort, SchoolKit and Julia, for leading us today through this session, and my staff, Abby and Marissa, for helping create the content that you saw today. So that being said, I hope everyone has a great evening, a great weekend, and we hope to see you back here next Tuesday.